My family threw me out for being too successful. Now they want me to save them. Success is supposed to be something you celebrate, something that lifts you above the circumstances you were born into, something that lets you breathe a little easier at night. At least that's what I had always believed. But in my family, success was a curse. It didn't matter that I had worked for it. It didn't matter that I had clawed my way up from nothing, sacrificed sleep, relationships, and sanity to build the kind of life none of us had ever dreamed was possible. In their eyes, I had committed the ultimate betrayal. I had changed. I had become something they no longer recognized, something they hated. And so, they had thrown me out. Not in the dramatic, get out and never come back way you see in movies. No, my exile was slower, more insidious, like a sickness creeping through a body. First came the passive-aggressive comments at family gatherings, the must-be-nice remarks whenever I paid for dinner, the eye rolls whenever I talked about my job, the way my siblings would scoff at my clothes, my car, my apartment, as if success was a stain I had allowed to spread too far. Then came the accusations. You think you're better than us. You forgot where you came from. You wouldn't have gotten anywhere without us. And finally, the breaking point. A family fight so vicious, so deeply laced with jealousy and resentment, that there was no coming back from it. I had heard my mother say things to me that no mother should ever say to a child. I had watched my father stand there, silent and unmoving, as my siblings ripped into me like I was nothing but an enemy, intruding on their lives. Then came the final blow. You don't belong to this family anymore. I walked away that night and never looked back. It hurt, more than I would ever admit. But over time, the pain dulled into something else, something harder, something colder. I built my walls. I focused on my work. I surrounded myself with people who saw me for what I was, not for what they wanted me to be. And eventually, I stopped thinking about them altogether. Until today. Until I got the phone call that changed everything. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar and I had no patience for spam calls. But something in my gut told me to pick up, an instinct I had long ago stopped trusting, but now, for some reason, decided to heed. The second I heard my mother's voice on the other end of the line, the past came rushing back like a cold, unforgiving tide. She sounded different, tired, stressed, but it wasn't enough to make me forget, not enough to make me forgive. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, she said, skipping over any pleasantries, her voice tight with something that sounded suspiciously like desperation. But we need your help. I almost laughed. We need your help. The irony was suffocating. For years I had been told I wasn't one of them anymore. That I had betrayed the family. That I was too good for them. That I had turned my back on where I came from. And now, suddenly, I was needed. I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her sweat. Help with what, exactly? A pause, hesitation. Then, finally, the truth. Your father, he made some bad investments, lost almost everything. And your brother... She cut off abruptly, as if she couldn't bring herself to say the words. Then, with a sharp inhale, she pushed forward. Your brother might be going to prison. I blinked slowly, letting the weight of her words settle over me. My father had always been reckless with money, but he had never been stupid. If he had lost everything, it meant he had gambled with more than he could afford. And my brother, the golden child, the one they had always compared me to, always lifted above me, always defended no matter what mistakes he made, in trouble with the law, I should have felt something. Shock, sadness, maybe even pity. But all I felt was vindication. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice even. We need money. Of course. It wasn't an apology they wanted. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't an attempt to mend the gaping wound they had inflicted when they threw me out. It was money. I tilted my head, smiling bitterly. Why would I give you a single cent? My mother sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. As if I was the unreasonable one here. As if I was the one being cruel. Because we're family. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. No, you made sure I wasn't part of the family years ago. she bristled. "We were angry. We said things we didn't mean." "Yes, you did," I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "You meant every single word. And now that you need me, suddenly all of that is supposed to disappear?" A long silence. Then finally she said it. "I'm sorry." It was the first time I had ever heard those words from her. And yet, they meant absolutely nothing. They thought I would say yes. That was the funniest part of all of this. After everything, they still thought I would come running, still thought I was desperate for their approval, still thought that blood alone was enough to bind me to them forever. They underestimated me, just like they always had. I stood in my office, staring out over the city skyline, my phone still in my hand, my mother's voice still lingering in my ear. And I let myself feel it, the anger, the betrayal, the quiet, bitter satisfaction of knowing that I had won. They had thrown me away. Now they needed me to save them. And I had a choice. Would I be the bigger person? Would I prove, once and for all, that I was never the villain they painted me to be? Or would I let them drown in the mess they had created? The power was mine now. I let the phone sit on my desk, the screen still glowing from the call that had just ended. The silence of my office felt louder than it should have, the weight of my mother's words pressing against me like something physical. "We need your help." For years I had dreamed of this moment, not because I ever wanted them to suffer, but because I wanted them to understand, to finally see the reality of what they had done, of what it meant to push someone away and then expect them to come running when things went south. And now, here it was. They were broken, desperate, humiliated, and I had the power to decide their fate. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the polished wood of my desk, staring at the view outside my window. The city stretched before me in a sea of glowing lights, a testament to everything I had built. My empire, my success, my life, one they had no part in, no claim to, no right to touch. And yet, even now, even after everything, some twisted, buried part of me still wanted to believe that they were capable of redemption, that maybe, just maybe, there was a version of this story where I could help them without betraying myself in the process. But I wasn't naive. Not anymore. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and pressed a name I hadn't dialed in years. The line rang once, twice. Then, a deep voice answered. "Didn't think I'd be hearing from you again." I exhaled through my nose. "I need information." A low chuckle. "Of course you do. Can you get it or not?" "You know me," the voice said, amusement creeping in. "I can find anything, for the right price." I smirked, already pulling up the details of my last wire transfer. "Send me what you find, and make sure it's everything. Consider it done." The line went dead. I set my phone down and stared at the city once more. Before I made my decision, I needed to know exactly what kind of trouble my family had gotten themselves into. Because something told me their situation was worse than they had let on. It didn't take long for the information to come through. By the time I stepped into my penthouse later that night, my email was already flooded with files, reports, and records I wasn't supposed to have access to. I poured myself a drink, settled onto the couch, and began reading. And the deeper I went, the angrier I became. It wasn't just bad investments. It wasn't just reckless financial decisions. It was fraud. My father hadn't just lost money. He had stolen it. Large sums funneled into shady accounts, forged documents, backdoor deals that had finally caught up to him. And my brother? The golden child? The one they had always worshipped while treating me like the outcast? He was the fall guy. The charges against him weren't just for tax evasion or business fraud. They were federal. He was looking at serious prison time, and from what I could tell, my father had done nothing to protect him. Typical. I closed the files, setting my drink down as I processed the weight of it all. They weren't just asking for my help. They were asking me to save them from themselves. And the question still remained. Should I? The next day, I didn't call my mother back. I didn't reach out. Instead, I let them wait. Let them wonder. I knew exactly how they worked. They would pretend to be patient at first, try to manipulate me into believing this wasn't a demand, but a request made out of love and regret. But the longer I stayed silent, the more that patience would crack. the more their true colors would bleed through. And sure enough, less than 24 hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't my mother. It was my sister. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Surprised to hear from you," I said smoothly. She didn't waste time. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Hello to you too." She let out a sharp breath. "You're really gonna ignore Mom? After everything?" I took my time responding, letting the silence work in my favor. "Define everything," I said finally. She scoffed. "Oh, don't play dumb. You know they need your help." "Yeah," I said, swirling my drink lazily. "I do." "And?" she snapped. "And what?" Silence. A beat of hesitation. Then she gritted out, "Are you going to help or not?" I leaned back against my desk, savoring the moment. The shift. The way the tables had turned so completely that they couldn't even pretend to hold power anymore. "What's in it for me?" I asked. She sputtered. Are you serious?" As a heart attack. She let out a bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. You really are as selfish as they said." Ah. There it was. The resentment. The entitlement. The same poison that had always lingered beneath their words, no matter how much they tried to hide it. Funny, I mused. Because last time I checked, you were the ones who threw me away. But now that you need something, I'm suddenly family again. She was silent. I continued, voice sharper now. "Let me ask you something. If the situation was reversed, if I was the one drowning and begging for help, would any of you lift a damn finger for me?" She said nothing, because we both knew the answer. I smiled coldly. "Thought so." I was about to hang up when she finally spoke, her voice quieter now. "Please," she murmured. "Mom is losing it. Dad won't talk to anyone, and if you don't help, my brother is going to prison." There was a time when that would have meant something to me, but that time had long since passed. "I'll think about it," I said. Then I hung up. I didn't think about it. Not really. I already knew what my answer was. But I wanted them to sit with their fear a little longer. I wanted them to feel what it was like to be discarded, to be helpless, to be nothing more than an afterthought in someone else's world. The next morning, I sent one final text. To Mom, I know everything. The fraud, the lies, the fact that you let my brother take the fall for Dad's mess. You don't deserve my help. But I'll give it to you under one condition. When this is over, you will never contact me again. You will never ask me for another favor. Never pretend I'm part of your family. Never speak my name again. Take it or leave it." I didn't expect an immediate response. But when it came, it was just 2 words. Deal. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally exhaling, the last of my resentment fading into something calmer. They wanted a savior. They got a businessman. And I had just made the best deal of my life. The moment my message was sent, I knew there was no going back. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. If all they needed was a check to make their problems disappear, I could have ended this with a single wire transfer and never thought about them again. But that wasn't enough. No, I wanted them to feel this, to understand it. They had spent years making me feel like an outsider, treating my success like a personal betrayal, casting me out the moment I no longer fit their definition of family. But now, they needed me. And if I was going to step in, it would be on my terms. They had to know that the power belonged to me now, and I intended to make sure they never forgot it. 2 days passed before my mother finally called again. I let it ring longer than necessary before answering, stretching the silence between us, letting her sit in the discomfort of knowing that she wasn't the one in control anymore. When I finally picked up, her voice was quieter than before. "We need to meet, in person." I considered it. "Why?" A pause. Then carefully she said, "This isn't something we can talk about over the phone." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the desk. "Where?" "Your father's house," she said, hesitating slightly before adding, "Tonight." My lips curled in amusement. Of course. They wanted me to come to them, to step back onto their turf, to give them some illusion of control over this situation. That wasn't going to happen. "No," I said simply. She exhaled sharply. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, if you want my help, you come to me." Silence. For a long moment I could hear nothing but the distant background noise on her end, the sound of her trying to decide whether her pride was worth more than the help they so desperately needed. Then, finally, she spoke. "Fine." I chose the restaurant carefully. It was high-end, exclusive, the kind of place where the waitstaff never looked directly at you unless spoken to, where the sound of polished silverware against porcelain was the only noise in the room. They would hate it, which was exactly why I picked it. I arrived early, settling into my seat with a glass of juice as I waited. The lighting was soft, the scent of expensive perfume and aged steak filling the air. Around me, other patrons carried on hushed conversations, business deals being made, affairs being carefully concealed, fortunes shifting hands over plates of artisanal cuisine. And then, right on time, my family walked in. After so many years I had seen them all together. My mother led the way, her sharp eyes scanning the restaurant like she was already uncomfortable. She was dressed well, probably the last of whatever money they had left. But there was a tightness to her movements, an unease she couldn't quite hide. Behind her, my father followed, his shoulders slightly hunched, his usual arrogance dimmed by whatever fallout he was facing. His suit was still pressed, still trying to cling to the image of the man he used to be, but the weight of failure sat heavy on him. And then there was my brother. He looked worse than the others. The stress had taken its toll. His jaw was clenched, his skin slightly paler than I remembered, dark circles beneath his eyes telling me just how little sleep he'd had since this all began. For a second, I wondered if he had asked for my help. Then, I dismissed the thought. No, he wouldn't have. Not after everything. This was all my mother's doing. I didn't stand when they reached the table. I didn't offer them a warm welcome or pretend we were just a normal family having dinner together. Instead, I took a slow sip of my drink before meeting my mother's gaze. "Have a seat," I said. They hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, reluctantly, they obeyed. The tension at the table was suffocating. No one spoke for a long moment, the weight of unspoken resentment settling between us like a silent war. Then, finally, my mother cleared her throat. "We appreciate you meeting with us." I tilted my head, studying her. "Let's skip the formalities. Tell me exactly what you need." She pressed her lips together, fingers twitching slightly before she folded them neatly on the table. "Your father's company is collapsing," she admitted. "The fraud charges are making it impossible to secure investors. We need someone to step in, someone reputable." I arched an eyebrow. "You mean someone like me?" Her expression tightened. "Yes." I nodded, my gaze shifting to my brother. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitching. "And you?" I asked, directing my words at him now. "What's your situation?" He hesitated. Then, with obvious reluctance, he muttered, "I could be facing real time." "Federal prison isn't fun," I mused. "Especially when you're not built for it." He shot me a sharp glare. "Don't start," I smirked. "Oh, I haven't even begun." My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was lower, rougher than I remembered. "Are you going to help us or not?" I let out a slow breath, pretending to consider my options. Then, I leaned forward. "I'll help," I said. They all straightened slightly, relief flashing in my mother's eyes. But before she could say anything, I held up a finger. "On one condition." The relief vanished. Suspicion took its place. "What condition?" my father asked, his tone wary. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You don't get to be in control anymore," I said. "Not in the business, not in the finances, not in anything." They stiffened. I continued, voice calm but unyielding. "If I step in, I own everything. You will sign over full control of the company to me. You will publicly acknowledge that you mismanaged it, that I am the only reason it's still standing. And when this is all over, you will walk away. No questions, no negotiations." My mother inhaled sharply. "You can't be serious." I met her gaze, my own expression unreadable. "Oh, but I am." My father looked furious. My brother looked sick, and my mother, she looked trapped, because she knew, just as I did, that they had no other options. They were the ones who needed me, and I was the one who would decide their fate. I leaned back, picking up my glass again, letting the silence stretch between us. "Take it," I said smoothly, "or leave it." They had thrown me away once. Now, I would see just how much they were willing to sacrifice to survive. The silence stretched across the table, thick and suffocating, as my words settled into the cracks of their desperation. Take it or leave it. I watched them, my expression unreadable, my patience thin. I could feel their resentment simmering beneath their carefully controlled facades, their pride warring with their need for survival. This was it. The moment they realized they had no power left. The moment they finally understood what it meant to beg for help from someone they had discarded. My father was the first to break. He shifted in his seat, jaw clenched, hands fisted against the table, as if physically restraining himself from lashing out. He had never been good at accepting defeat, never been the type to lower himself even when he had no other options. But now he was a drowning man, and I was the only lifeline in sight. "You expect me to sign over my company to you?" His voice was quiet, but there was an edge of disbelief, of rage, beneath it. I tilted my head, unfazed. "It's not your company anymore. The moment you let fraud and corruption bleed into its foundation, you killed it. I'm offering to rebuild it, but under my name, my control." He bristled, shoulders squaring as if he thought he could intimidate me. But I didn't so much as blink. That old trick didn't work anymore. My mother was the next to speak, her tone softer, carefully measured. "We understand your conditions, but surely there's room to negotiate." "There's not." She flinched slightly. My brother, who had been silent until now, finally exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is insane." His voice was rough, exhaustion creeping in at the edges. "You want us to just hand over everything? What the hell do we have left if we do that?" I met his gaze, cold and unwavering. "You'll have nothing. The same nothing you left me with." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. I let the silence linger, let them feel the weight of it, pressing down on them. Then, I leaned forward, my voice lower now, calmer. "You threw me away," I said, the words slow and deliberate. "You told me I didn't belong to this family anymore, that I was selfish, that I thought I was better than you." I let out a soft, bitter chuckle. "And yet, here we are. And the only reason you're still sitting at this table instead of rotting in a courtroom is because of me." No one spoke. Good. I took another sip of my drink, then placed the glass down with a soft clink. "So yes, you will hand over everything. You will sign. And when this is over, you will walk away without ever looking back. Because if you don't..." I shrugged, leaning back. "Then you can find another way to fix the mess you created." They knew there was no other way. And finally, they accepted it. The contracts were drawn up the next day. I made sure they weren't just legally binding, but airtight. No loopholes, no room for misinterpretation, no possible way for them to claw their way back into power once this was done. My father's company, his legacy, was now mine. The official documents transferred every remaining asset, every share, every ounce of control into my hands. He signed the papers with stiff fingers, his expression blank, but I could see the barely concealed fury in the hard set of his jaw. He hated this. Hated me. Good. My brother, facing criminal charges that could very well ruin his life, had no choice but to take the deal I arranged for him. A team of lawyers, my lawyers, worked a plea bargain, minimizing his sentence, ensuring he would never set foot in prison. But at a cost. He was permanently blacklisted from the industry. No more family business, no more power, nothing. And my mother? She had to watch it all crumble. She had spent years playing the role of the puppet master, manipulating, controlling, making sure that no matter what happened, she was always in the center of it. But not anymore. Her influence was gone. The house, sold, the assets, liquidated. The lavish lifestyle she had fought so hard to maintain? Gone. They weren't homeless. I didn't leave them with nothing. But they would never, ever be able to live the way they had before. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The last time I saw them was the day everything was finalized. We stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the deal hanging heavy between us. There were no heartfelt reconciliations, no dramatic speeches about family and forgiveness. Just the cold reality of consequences. My father didn't look at me. He simply turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, dignity shattered. My brother lingered for half a second, like he wanted to say something, maybe even apologize. But he didn't, because he knew it wouldn't matter. And my mother? She looked at me with something unreadable in her expression, a mixture of anger, regret, maybe even sadness. "You really hate us that much?" she asked quietly. I studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, I said, "No, I don't hate you." She blinked, surprised. "But I'll never forgive you." Her face tightened, but she didn't argue. She just nodded once, a barely perceptible movement, and then, just like that, she turned and walked away. I watched them leave, each step taking them further and further from my world, from the life I had built without them.
My family threw me out at 18, but now they want me to pay for my brother's college. I still remember the night my parents kicked me out. 18 years old, standing on the front porch with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of anger. My father's voice rang in my ears. "You want to live by your own rules? Fine. Do it somewhere else." My mother didn't even look at me. My younger brother Jacob peeked out from behind the doorway, too scared to say a word. I spent the next few years fighting for survival. Couch surfing, working minimum wage jobs, skipping meals just to afford rent. College wasn't an option. Every dollar went to keeping myself afloat. There were nights I slept in my car, nights I wondered if I'd ever make it out of the hole they had thrown me into. But I did. I worked my way up. First as an intern, then an entry-level employee, and eventually, I built something for myself. A business, a life, a future. Now, at 28, I had a 6-figure salary, a condo with a view, and a freedom I never thought I'd have, no thanks to them. So when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother, the first in years, I nearly laughed. "Mom. Hey sweetheart, hope you're doing well. Can we talk?" I should have ignored it. But some bitter, curious part of me responded. "Me? What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly. "Mom. It's about Jacob. He's been accepted into a great college, but we're struggling with tuition. We know you're doing well, and we were hoping you could help out. It would mean so much to the family." I stared at my screen, stunned. They threw me away. And now they had the audacity to ask for money. I let the message sit there, unread. Let them wonder. Because this time, I wasn't the desperate one. I didn't respond for days. Let them sweat. Let them feel even a fraction of what I had felt when they shut the door in my face. But the messages kept coming. First, my mother. Then my father. Then Jacob. "Jacob. I know they weren't fair to you, but I had nothing to do with that. Please, just talk to me." That one made me pause. Jacob had never wronged me. He had been a kid when I was forced out. He had no power over what happened. So I agreed to meet him. Just him. Not our parents. We met at a quiet cafe. The moment he walked in, I saw the nervousness in his face. The guilt. "I didn't want them to ask you," he admitted as soon as he sat down. They don't know what else to do." I leaned back, arms crossed. "And why should that be my problem?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know. It shouldn't be, but He sighed. "I didn't know how bad it was for you back then. I was just a kid. But I know now, and I know it was wrong." That was more than my parents had ever said. I studied him for a long moment. "You really want this degree?" He nodded, desperation flickering in his eyes. "More than anything." I tapped my fingers against the table, thinking. I could just say no. Walk away and never look back. Or I could do something better. I smirked. "All right, Jacob, I'll help you." His eyes widened. "Wait, really?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "But not the way they want me to. Because if my parents thought they were getting a dime from me, they were in for a rude awakening." Jacob blinked at me, confused. What do you mean? I sipped my coffee, letting the suspense build. I'll help you, but not through them. They won't see a single cent. His shoulders tensed. They're gonna lose it. I smirked. Not my problem. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't want to be caught in the middle. I shrugged. Then don't be. This is between me and them. I leaned forward. You said you didn't know how bad it was for me back then. Well, let me make it clear, they left me with nothing. I had to build everything from scratch while they went on like I never existed. And now, years later, they only remember me because I have money. Jacob looked down, guilt flashing in his eyes. But, I continued, you're different. You're not them. His head snapped up. I folded my arms. If I agree to help, it's on my terms. You take the money directly from me. They never touch it. And in return, you don't let them use you as a pawn to guilt me. Jacob hesitated, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He knew exactly what I was asking, loyalty. A clean break from their manipulation. After a long moment, he nodded. Okay. I don't want to be like them. I just want a chance at something better. That was all I needed to hear. Then we have a deal. The fallout came fast. The moment Jacob told our parents I was helping him, but not them, my phone blew up. Calls. Messages. Desperate, angry voicemails. My mother's voice shook with rage. How dare you go behind our backs? My father's was colder. You think this makes you better than us? I didn't respond. Let them scream into the void. But then, late one night, Jacob texted. Jacob. They're threatening to cut me off if I take your money. I stared at the screen, shaking my head. Of course they were. Me. That's their choice. But you need to make yours. Minutes passed. Then, Jacob. I'm taking your help. I'm done letting them control me. A slow smile spread across my face. They had lost. Not just the money, not just control over me. They had lost Jacob too. They were left with exactly what they had given me years ago. Nothing. The silence from my parents didn't last long. After Jacob made his choice, they panicked. Their messages went from angry and demanding to pathetic and desperate. My mother tried guilt first, sending long texts about how families should support each other, how I was being cruel, how they had done their best as parents and it wasn't fair for me to hold the past against them. My father was more direct, his words sharp and bitter, accusing me of turning Jacob against them, of being vindictive, of acting like I was above them just because I had money now. I read every message, but I never replied. What was there to say? They hadn't cared about me when I was struggling, so why should I care now that they were scrambling to maintain control over Jacob? They had made their choice years ago. Now, they could live with it. Jacob, on the other hand, was struggling. He had never been on the receiving end of their manipulation before. When he lived under their roof, they had coddled him, made him feel special, treated him like the golden child. But now he was seeing the ugly truth, and it was hitting him hard. One night, he called me, his voice tense and exhausted. They're losing their minds, he admitted. Mom won't stop crying. Dad barely talks to me unless it's to tell me I'm making a huge mistake. He sighed. It's weird. I always thought they had my back, you know. But now that I'm not doing exactly what they want, it's like I don't even exist to them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. That's how it goes with them. Their love comes with conditions. The moment you stop obeying, they take it away. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. How did you deal with it? I smirked, but there was no humor in it. I didn't have a choice, I just had to survive. He exhaled, frustration laced in his voice. I don't get it. They have jobs, they have a house, they're not broke. Why are they acting like I've ruined them just because you're paying for college instead of them? I laughed. Because it was never about the money, Jacob. It was about control. They wanted to be the ones to decide your future. By taking my help, you're showing them they don't own you. Another long silence. Then, finally, Jacob said, I don't think I can go back there. Then don't. And just like that, I knew things had shifted. For good. Jacob moved into my spare room a week later. He didn't say much when he arrived, just carried his bags inside, looking a little lost, a little uncertain. I understood that feeling all too well. He was leaving behind everything he had known, stepping into a new life with no idea what came next. But unlike me, he wasn't alone. At first, he was tense. checking his phone constantly, waiting for another guilt trip from our parents. But slowly, as the days passed and the messages stopped coming, he started to relax. We settled into a routine. I worked during the day, he prepared for school, and at night, we'd eat together, something we hadn't done since we were kids. One evening, we sat on the balcony, the city lights stretching out in front of us. Jacob stared at the skyline, his expression unreadable. I used to think they were perfect, he admitted. Like, I thought they had all the answers. But now, I don't even know who they are anymore. I took a sip of my drink, choosing my words carefully. They're just people, Jacob. Flawed, selfish people who never should have been parents. He let out a small laugh. You sound so over it. I glanced at him. I am. Jacob turned back to the skyline, thinking. Then, quietly, he said, I want to be over it too. I didn't tell him it would happen overnight. I didn't tell him that the anger, the resentment, the disappointment would vanish instantly. It wouldn't. But for the first time, he was seeing them clearly. And that was the first step. Our parents had expected me to crumble when they threw me out. They had expected Jacob to obey them forever. They were wrong about both of us. And now, maybe, just maybe, we were finally free. The longer Jacob stayed, the more I saw the cracks in the version of him I had grown up with. For years, I had resented him. Not because he had done anything to me directly, but because he had been their favorite. He had been given the love, the support, the stability that I had never known. And yet, now that he was away from them, I could see it. He wasn't as lucky as I thought. At first, he was restless, always waiting for the next argument, the next explosion. He barely spoke about our parents, but I knew they were still in his head, still making him second-guess himself. One night, I walked into the living room to find him sitting in the dark, scrolling through old photos on his phone. They don't care, I said, leaning against the doorway. He flinched, like he hadn't noticed me there. I know, he muttered. But he didn't put the phone down. I sighed, walking over to sit across from him. So why do you keep looking at their pictures? He hesitated, then set the phone face down on the table. I guess, I keep thinking they'll reach out. That maybe they'll realize they were wrong and fix things. He let out a bitter laugh. Stupid, right? I shook my head. Not stupid, just hopeful. He scoffed. You weren't. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I was. When I first left, I thought maybe they'd call. Maybe they'd show up at my door, tell me they made a mistake. But they didn't. I leaned back, watching his face. Eventually, I stopped waiting. Jacob swallowed hard. How long did that take? I thought about it for a moment before answering. Longer than I'd like to admit. He nodded, staring at the table. Yeah. That's what I was afraid of. I didn't tell him that the weight would get easier to carry. He had to figure that out on his own. Jacob started to change. It was small at first, little things. He stopped checking his phone as often. He started talking more about his classes, about the things he wanted for his future. He smiled more, laughed more, looked more like his own person instead of just the son they had shaped. But then, one afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was at work when my phone rang, Jacob's name flashing across the screen. The second I answered, I could tell something was wrong. His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it, there was something else, something raw. They showed up, he said. I grabbed my keys without hesitation. Where are you? Still at the apartment, he muttered. They're gone now. A pause. Then, softer. But it was bad. Fury rose in my chest. I didn't even need to ask what happened. I already knew. I got home as fast as I could, half expecting to find Jacob in pieces, shaken and unsure. But when I stepped inside, he wasn't curled up on the couch or locked in his room. He was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes blazing. I told them to leave, he said simply. I set my things down carefully. What did they say? Jacob exhaled through his nose. Everything you'd expect. That I was ungrateful. That I was letting you poison me against them. His lips pressed into a thin line. Mom started crying. Dad started yelling. The usual. I studied him. And? He met my gaze, his shoulders squared. And I didn't care. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He just stood there, steady, unshaken. For the first time in his life, he had told them no. And he wasn't looking back. I stood there in the quiet aftermath, feeling a calm determination settle over me as I realized that the final chapter of this painful saga was about to be written. Jacob and I had carved out our own space away from the toxic grip of our parents, and tonight, we finally confronted them face to face at a family dinner organized by our estranged relatives who hoped to mend the past. The tension in the room was palpable as our mother, father, and even distant cousins gathered around the table, their expressions a mix of regret and stubborn pride. I took a deep breath and began speaking, recounting the years of abandonment and sacrifice, the nights spent fighting loneliness and poverty, and the relentless pursuit of a future that they had tried to deny me. My words, measured and sincere, cut through the false niceties, leaving no room for half-hearted apologies. I explained how their demands had become a reminder of their disregard, and how, in reclaiming my independence, I had discovered my true worth. The room fell silent as the weight of my testimony sunk in. Even the most unyielding faces softened with remorse. Jacob's steady gaze told me he was finally free from their manipulation, and as I concluded by stating that our reconciliation would only come when respect was restored and genuine change demonstrated, the finality in my tone left no doubt that this was not another appeal for forgiveness, but a declaration of our liberation. After the dinner, our parents could no longer hide behind denial. Confronted with the undeniable truth and the cost of their selfish choices, they began to understand that the time for excuses had long passed. Over the following weeks, they made a genuine effort to rebuild bridges, offering sincere apologies and trying to prove they had learned from their past mistakes. Jacob and I observed their actions with cautious optimism, gradually realizing that while scars remain, healing is possible when accountability replaces entitlement. As each day passed, our family slowly transformed from a battleground of resentment to a fragile network of honest conversations and small gestures of care. In accepting their apology, I made it clear that forgiveness was a process, not an instant fix, but that I was ready to move forward, not as a pawn to be exploited, but as a person who had finally claimed her power. The past was acknowledged, the wounds began to close, and a new chapter in our family story was written, one where respect and responsibility finally took center stage. In the months that followed, a sense of balance was restored that none of us had anticipated. I dedicated myself to nurturing the relationships that truly mattered, forging a life defined by my own choices rather than the burdens of my history. With Jacob now thriving in college, supported by a carefully managed plan that ensured he earned every opportunity, and with our parents slowly learning what it meant to care for us without expecting unearned gratitude, I began to see the fragments of a family reborn. My business continued to flourish, and I invested in both my future and in community projects that gave back to those who had been overlooked, ensuring that my own success would be a foundation for hope rather than a tool of exploitation. I no longer carried the bitter memories of rejection as a chain, but as a reminder of how far I had come. Every setback had steeled my resolve, and every betrayal had taught me the value of self-respect. At last, I found solace in the realization that the most important relationship was the one I had with myself. The day I closed the final chapter of that long and painful story, I celebrated not just survival, but a victory over a lifetime of being cast aside. My parents, though imperfect, had begun to embrace the lessons of humility and compassion, and Jacob, once caught in the middle of familial discord, emerged as an independent, determined young man. As I looked out over the city from my new apartment, a space I had created on my own terms, I knew that I had reclaimed my narrative. The bitterness of the past had given way to a future built on strength, forgiveness, and the wisdom to choose who deserved a place in my life. With my head held high and my heart finally at peace, I stepped forward into a bright new day, confident that I had transformed pain into power and betrayal into a chance for true, lasting change.